Are we close to having stagflation?
Yeah, we are in stagflation.
We are. Stagflation is simply where, you have inflation, and yet at the same time, you have high unemployment.
Yeah, you have economic weakness.
Right.
In other words, you have a stagnant economy. Stagnant, essentially means
meaning growth is reduced.
Low growth, and with high inflation. And that happens through this monetary situation that I'm describing, in which the central bank tries to deal with a middle course. In other words, what does the central bank want? Not too high inflation and not too low growth. And so when there's a lot of debt, because one man's debts are another man's assets, it becomes very difficult balancing act. And that is when you have stagflation, when you produce it. So just like in the 1960s, late 60s, we spent a lot of money on guns and butter, we called it,
right.
The Vietnam War and social programs and so on. We wrote too many checks relative to the money we had in the bank, which was gold at the time. 1971, the devaluation. Then they print a lot of money into that stagflation. So stagflation is is the middle course when there's two different.
So the Fed and Jay Powell has a balancing act that he has to achieve in order to try to ward off a recession.
Right. So think about it this way. How does he literally fight inflation? Because everybody says tight money policies, and how do you fight inflation? Well, the way that happens is you get people to spend less by taking money and credit away from them.
Right.
So he will reduce the amount of money and credit that's available. The Federal Reserve is going to sell $1.1 trillion of debt that it has, debt assets, bonds. Right. And then they're going to raise interest rates. So they create a squeeze that reduces demand at the same time as people don't have enough money because inflation is high. So that squeeze,
and their buying power is less.
That's right, because inflation is high, the buying power is less. And then what that act is to reduce buying power again, to reduce inflation, but it comes at a big cost, and that is stagflation. When you have so much debt that is also somebody's stored wealth, either the debtor or the creditor is going to pay. And it becomes very, very difficult to balance those two things for central banks. That's why that's the challenge of having a lot of debt, which is a lot of financial assets, because that balancing act becomes difficult. So I think that right now we have a problem in that a high enough interest rate to adequately control inflation or provide an adequate return to inflation is too high of an interest rate for the capital markets and for the economy. So I believe that we're entering a period which it's going to be very, very difficult for the Fed and for other central banks to try to find that right balance. They're going to navigate between those two things. Too tight means a bad economy, and too loose means a bad inflation. And I think that difference is going to produce more of a stagflation type of environment. This is particularly true internationally because internationally, a lot of the world is holding bonds because it's a reserve currency. If you want to save in a bond, if you want to save in dollars because you use it so much, you buy it and you save in it and you buy the bonds. But they're overweighted in dollars. So it's not certain. But it is a big, big risk that I think everybody's too casual about. There's going to be, when you're stuck with two trade-offs, too much inflation, or you're stuck with too much economic weakness, then you navigate through the middle, and that means something like stagflation. And so I think we're entering a period of stagflation. And I think the political and the wealth gap issues and so on create a set of circumstances that it's not easy to get out of.